Well, hello class. It's my pleasure to come to you today from the home of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, located in Anacostia, Washington, D.C. And on this particular visit, I'm honored to be here with my mother, Prof Levy, who's visited so many historic sites with us. But on our way back from North Carolina to Pennsylvania, we stopped in Washington, D.C. so that we can visit the home of Frederick Douglass. And now the cameraman will give you a view of the house. Frederick Douglass moved here in 1877. So during Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction, this was his home. And it was very close to Washington, D.C. If it gives you a pan, you can see down there would be Washington, D.C. And also to give you a sense of the estate, to the right you can see it sat on this lovely hill. By this point in Frederick Douglass's life, he was very famous and quite wealthy, primarily from the sales of his books. In our course right now, we're probably reading the narrative of 1845, his first autobiography. Then he published My Bondage, My Freedom, and then his final book was called The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. In addition to that, he published a newspaper called the Northern Star. And it was called the Northern Star because that is when slaves would run away from the South, how would they find their way to the North? Well, at night they would look up, they would find the Northern Star, and that would tell them where the North was, and they would follow the Northern Star. But then also they needed to have connections in what was called the Underground Railroad. And Frederick Douglass, as we know, was born a slave in Maryland, and he describes the brutality, the treatment. It must have been surreal to go from living in that one-room slave shack. As you know, his mother was sold away from him, and he hardly knew her. And then the abuse that he witnessed and experienced, them working in Baltimore also as a slave on ships, and then making 2 attempts to escape. It's very special for us to be here because Frederick Douglass represents so much to American history and to African American history. In particular, what struck me, when you go into the home, you see a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And in the 1860s, when Douglass was still living in Rochester, New York, I believe I have the video from his grave. He's buried actually in Rochester, New York. But here, when he came to Washington in the 1860s, he visited Abraham Lincoln in 1861. He was a tremendous influence in convincing Lincoln to both sign the Emancipation Proclamation and to recruit black soldiers during the American Civil War. In fact, Frederick Douglass was active in recruiting both soldiers for the Massachusetts 54th and the Massachusetts 55th. If you've seen the movie Glory with Denzel Washington, it's about one of those regiments. 2 of Frederick Douglass's sons actually served in that regiment. Finally, in 1865, just a few weeks before Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Frederick Douglass went to Washington, to the Capitol building, to hear Lincoln give the second inaugural address. And in that address, Abraham Lincoln expressed his support for both what would become the 13th and 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment made black people citizens of the United States and supported the 15th Amendment, giving black men at least the right to vote. After the address, he went, just as a kind of anecdote, he went to the White House for the reception, and the guards at the White House would not let Frederick Douglass in. Their policy was that Negroes were not allowed into the White House. And when Frederick Douglass told the guard that I'm a friend of Abraham Lincoln's, they did not believe him. And it took several efforts until he was finally admitted. But Frederick Douglass is very important because he influenced Lincoln's thinking, because Abraham Lincoln got to know very educated, intelligent people like Abraham Lincoln, like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth. It really influenced his belief in the equality of the races here in the United States. So if you're ever in Washington or near Washington on 95, going up or down 95, I encourage you to stop by and see this historic site. It will really make history come alive for you. Hope you're enjoying the course. Take care and be well.